small black plastic disc, 2 inches across, sitting on a rock at the edge of a tree line at 9,400 feet above sea level. Placed there, or dropped there, that distinction matters more than it seems. It was the lens cap from a 14-year-old girl's camera, and it was the only thing left of her in the entire world. Not a footprint, not a thread of fabric, not a scent trail that a single dog could follow, not a trace of a camera, a windbreaker, a pair of hiking boots, or the girl who wore them. Just this, a small black cap placed or dropped on a rock near some trees, as if to mark the exact spot where Stacy Arras ceased to exist. The year was 1981. The park was Yosemite. Over the 9 days that followed, more than 150 people combed every square inch of the surrounding wilderness, every canyon, every snowfield, every ravine. And they found nothing. Nothing except that cap. In over 4 decades, no one has explained it. But there is one detail in the search records, a detail buried in a case file that the National Park Service has refused to release for more than 40 years, that changes how this story reads entirely. A detail about what the search dogs did when they reached that tree line, what they refused to do, and why their handler, a man with 30 years of wilderness rescue behind him, could not explain it to anyone's satisfaction. The summer of 1981 in California smelled like dry pine and warm granite. That particular perfume the High Sierra produces in July, resin and altitude, and something older, something that predates the roads and the park signs and the ranger stations by millions of years. Stacy Ann Arras was 14 years old, and she lived with her family in Saratoga, California, just south of San Francisco. Blonde, blue-eyed, 5 feet 5 inches tall. She wore dental retainers and a gold ankle bracelet she never took off. She smoked cigarettes with the quiet defiance of a teenager who wanted the world to know she had her own opinions. She carried an Olympus camera on a multicolored embroidered strap, and she had a gift for it, for finding angles other people walked past without seeing. Her father was George Arras. This trip was their trip, 4 days on horseback through the High Sierra camps, a chance to breathe the same air and remember that they liked each other. It was not unusual for the Arras family to spend time in the national parks. Then they knew how to move in wild places. They were not the kind of people who made careless mistakes. On July 17, 1981, George and Stacy arrived at Tuolumne Meadows and joined a small group of riders led by a guide named Chris Grimes. The exact number of riders varies by account, somewhere between 7 and 10, not counting guides. They set off along the John Muir Trail, heading southeast through one of the most photographed landscapes on the continent, and stopped for food near Upper Cathedral Lakes at around 3 in the afternoon. The mountains above them were the color of bones, granite so pale it seemed to glow. Below, meadows of high alpine grass caught the afternoon light and held it like still water. The sky at 9,000 feet is a different kind of blue, darker, heavier, as if the atmosphere is already beginning to thin into something else entirely. Stacy had her camera out the whole ride. Of course she did. This was exactly the kind of place that rewards someone who knows how to look. By late afternoon, the group reached Sunrise High Sierra Camp. 9 wooden cabins set against an alpine meadow at 9,400 feet, facing the pale, indifferent faces of Mount Florence and Mount Clark. The camp sits about 1.5 miles from Sunrise Lakes, the nearest body of water. They tied the horses. They went inside to wash off the dust of the trail. It was the kind of evening that feels like it will last forever. The group was relaxed, unhurried, comfortable with the silence of high places. Nobody was worried. Nobody had any reason to be. Stacy showered and changed into fresh clothes. Her off-white hooded windbreaker, her striped shorts, her gray hiking boots with the Vibram soles. Her father mentioned later that she had initially tried to leave wearing sandals, and that he stopped her and made her put the boots on instead. It was the last conversation they ever had. She asked if he wanted to walk with her to the lake. He said he'd stay at the cabin. Outside, sitting on a boulder about 100 feet from the cabins, was Gerald Stewart, an older man from the group somewhere in his 70s. A fellow resident of Saratoga, though how well they knew each other before that trip is unclear. Stacy walked over to him. They talked. She took a few photographs near the cabin area. Then she told him she wanted to go further, down toward the lake, where the light would be better on the water. Gerald said he would walk with her. The rest of the group watched from the cabin area as the two of them headed downhill along the trail. They were in full view the entire time. The trail was open ground. The afternoon was clear and still and bright. After a short distance, Gerald sat down. He was tired. The witnesses watching from above saw him lower himself onto a rock. They saw Stacy continue down the trail without him, moving toward the tree line at the edge of the meadow. They watched her walk behind two trees. And then they watched the space where she had been. She did not come out the other side. She did not reappear anywhere along the tree line. After a few minutes, accounts vary, but it was a matter of minutes, not hours, Gerald called out for her. No answer. He called again. Silence. There is a specific quality to silence in the High Sierra. It is not the silence of a room or a street at night. It is something older, the silence of granite that formed 300 million years ago and has not moved since. The silence of an altitude where even the insects thin out, where the wind sometimes drops so completely that you can hear your own pulse. It is the silence of something that has absolutely no interest in you at all. The group reached the tree line within minutes of realizing Stacy was gone. They fanned out. They shouted her name. The sound of it bounced off the granite faces above and came back to them changed, flattened, emptied of urgency by the sheer indifference of the rock. Nothing answered. This is what the terrain looks like at the edge of Sunrise Camp. And every feature of it makes what happened next harder to explain. Beyond the tree line, the ground breaks into a confusion of granite boulders, some of them 15, 20 feet high, tumbled and stacked in formations that create deep pockets and narrow fissures between them. Those fissures can be 3 feet wide at the top and 6 feet deep, invisible until you are standing on the edge of one. But the area where Stacy was last seen, the two trees, the trail, the immediate tree line, was not the boulder field. It was open trail, visible from above, being watched. The nearest road from Sunrise Camp is approximately 3 to 4 miles away through wilderness terrain. At altitude, off trail. That distance is not a walk. It is a serious undertaking in daylight with proper equipment for an experienced adult. Stacy was 14, in sandals she had almost worn instead of hiking boots, alone. And she had been in sight of the group less than 5 minutes before she vanished. The National Park Service was contacted almost immediately. Rangers reached the camp before dark. The formal search began that evening and would run for 9 consecutive days. 150 people, 67 members of the Mountain Rescue Association alone, helicopters scanning the terrain from above, dogs brought in to track a scent through granite and pine. They worked a search radius covering 3 to 5 square miles around Sunrise Lake. 9 days of that. Every ravine, every boulder field, every shadow between the rocks. And in 9 days, they found one thing. A lens cap. Black plastic, approximately 2 inches across, located near the tree line in the area where witnesses last saw Stacy walking. It belonged to her Olympus camera. The camera itself was never found. Not the strap, not the film inside, not a single photograph she had taken that afternoon. Nothing else. Not a boot, not a thread from the windbreaker, not the gold ankle bracelet she wore every day. Not a single biological trace that any dog, in 9 days of searching, could fix upon and follow. Here is what you need to understand about search dogs working high-altitude wilderness terrain. Their olfactory system processes roughly 10,000 times more information per breath than a human nose. A trained search dog can follow a scent trail that is days old, across rain and wind, through terrain that should have destroyed any trace. These are not dogs following a smell. These are biological instruments calibrated to a single purpose: finding what is hidden. The 1981 search brought in multiple canine units. The Fresno Bee reported at the time that the dogs were unable to pick up any scent because of dry and dusty conditions. That explanation was offered. It was printed. It was accepted. But think carefully about what that means. Dry and dusty conditions do not erase a scent trail. They reduce it. They make it harder to follow. They do not make a person disappear from the nose of a trained dog entirely. Not in the first hours of a search. Not in terrain the person had just walked through. Not on the day she vanished. And yet that is exactly what happened. Every canine unit. 0 scent. As if Stacy Arras had never walked that trail at all. That is the detail the newspaper printed, and then everyone moved on. But there is something else in the record, something less official, that the handlers said quietly, off to the side, away from the press. That some of the dogs did not simply fail to track. Some of them stopped, at the same approximate location, near the tree line where the lens cap was found. Stopped and would not go further, despite commands, despite pressure, despite every technique their handlers knew. And when dogs trained for wilderness rescue stop at a location and refuse to move, that is not failure. That is a communication. The question that no one has ever answered is, what were they telling us? This is the detail that separates this case from every simple explanation. Not its existence, its condition, its placement. A lens cap, the protective cover for a camera lens, does not simply fall off a camera and land on a rock sitting upright. Lens caps fall from cameras when the camera is pointed downward or when there is a sudden impact. They fall onto the ground. They bounce. They roll. They do not come to rest alone on a rock surface, as if placed there by someone who wanted it to be found. The witnesses who saw Stacy walk behind the trees described nothing. No stumble, no fall, no sound. She walked behind the trees at a normal pace, camera in hand, and disappeared. Not disappeared as in walked out of sight. Disappeared as in did not come out, did not come back, did not call out, did not make a sound. As if the trees had simply absorbed her. The Olympus camera she was carrying had a multicolored embroidered neck strap. the kind that sits visibly around the shoulders, bright against any natural background. It was never found. In 9 days of searching with 150 people across 3 to 5 square miles of terrain, no searcher ever walked past an Olympus camera with a multicolored strap lying on the ground, or wedged between boulders, or hanging in a tree. It is as if it went wherever she went, and only the cap, only this 2-inch disc of black plastic, was left behind to mark the threshold. This brings us to the case file. The National Park Service maintains a case file on the disappearance of Stacy Arras. That file is over 2,000 pages long. Read that again. 2,000 pages. Most missing persons case files are 10 to 100 pages. Extensive ones, involving prolonged investigations, reach several hundred. 2,000 pages is not a missing persons file. It is something else. What they investigated in those 2,000 pages, they have not said. Every Freedom of Information request for its release has been denied. 43 years after a 14-year-old girl walked behind 2 trees at the edge of a meadow and never came back, the Park Service is still holding the file, still treating it as an active case. And here is what that tells us. If Stacy Arras fell into a crevice, or wandered off trail and became disoriented, or was taken by a predator, all explanations that have been offered, those events do not generate 2,000 pages of documentation 40 years later. They generate a closed file, a resolution, a death certificate. Whatever happened to Stacy Arras, the National Park Service either knows something it will not say, or is still searching for an answer it cannot find. Neither possibility is comforting. Let's consider the rational explanations, one by one, and let them answer for themselves. The first, she fell. The terrain beyond the tree line contains granite boulder fields with deep fissures between the rocks, narrow enough that a person could fall into one and not be visible from above. But Stacy was seen walking on the open trail, not in the boulder field. She was still in view when she passed behind the trees, and if she had fallen into a crevice, the dogs would have found her. The smell from a body in a crevice does not disappear. It concentrates. A trained rescue dog finds people in exactly these circumstances. That is what they are for. They found nothing the second she left voluntarily. The Fresno Bee reported in July 1981 that Stacy had been experiencing some personal difficulties, school troubles, a relationship that may have been strained. Her mother denied any serious relationship. But consider the geography again. The nearest road was 3 to 4 miles away through wilderness at altitude without navigation tools. And even if Stacy had somehow reached that road, the aftermath of her disappearance, the search, the media coverage, the NCMEC case, the decades of investigation, would have surfaced some trace of her. She has never appeared on any database. No record. No sighting. Nowhere. Not in 43 years. The third, criminal involvement. The location argues against it. Sunrise High Sierra Camp is not accessible by vehicle. Getting there requires miles of trail on horseback or on foot. Removing a person from that location without trace or witness, while the rest of the group watched from 100 feet away, requires something that strains the limits of what is logistically possible. And yet the file is 2,000 pages. The case has never been closed. Someone thought something worth investigating, and they have not told us what it was. What remains, after the rational explanations have spoken and been found wanting, is a silence that has the shape of a question. There are researchers who have documented dozens of cases from the Sierra Nevada and surrounding wilderness areas in which people, most commonly young people traveling alone or slightly apart from a group, vanish without trace near bodies of water, in terrain that is subsequently searched exhaustively and yields nothing. No pattern, officially. No cluster, officially. But unofficially, the rangers who have worked these cases, some of them, have noted something they do not put in reports. That certain areas repeat. That certain configurations of terrain and proximity to water appear in multiple files. That the absence of any trace, clothing, biological material, any object, recurs in a way that accidents and encounters with animals simply do not replicate. Animals leave evidence. Falls leave evidence. Even the most remote disappearances eventually yield something. A bone, a boot, a piece of clothing caught on a branch. Stacy Arras left a lens cap on a rock, and nothing else. In 43 years. Nothing else. What kind of disappearance leaves only a lens cap? Sunrise High Sierra Camp is still there. 9 cabins set against an alpine meadow at 9,400 feet, facing Mount Florence and Mount Clark. You can book a bed there right now. Thousands of people ride the High Sierra Camp Loop every summer, tie up their horses in the same place, walk the same trail down toward Sunrise Lakes to photograph the water in the late afternoon light. Most of them have never heard of Stacy Arras. None of them know that somewhere along that trail, near a tree line that looks like any other tree line on any other summer afternoon, a 14-year-old girl with a camera walked behind 2 trees and did not come back. Her case remains officially open with the National Park Service. Her mother, Carol, waited years for answers that never came. Her father, George, lived with the weight of a July afternoon he could not explain. The sandals he made her, change, the walk he chose not to take, the moment he watched from the cabin as she headed downhill and didn't call her back. None of that is a cause. It is just the ordinary texture of a day that ended wrong. The kind of day that starts with horses and sunlight and a father telling his daughter to wear proper boots and ends with a lens cap on a rock and a silence that has not broken since. The 2,000 pages sit in a federal archive. Every request to see them has been denied. Somewhere in those pages is the most complete record of what happened on that trail, on that afternoon, near those 2 trees at the edge of the meadow. What was investigated, what was found, what was considered, and then, for reasons that have never been explained, sealed. The mountain does not explain itself. The granite does not speak. The file does not open. And somewhere on a trail at 9,400 feet, near a tree line that looks like any other, a small black plastic cap sits in an evidence bag in a building far from the mountain. The last object her hands touched, the only proof she was ever there at all. 2 inches of plastic, a threshold marker. A question with no answer on either side of it. Stacy Arras, 14 years old. Yosemite National Park, July 17th, 1981. Still missing. Stacy Arras vanished without a sound, leaving behind nothing but a small piece of plastic on a rock and a case file too large and too sealed to mean nothing. A disappearance witnessed from 100 feet away in broad daylight, in front of a group of people who all saw the same thing and still could not say where she went. But Stacy's disappearance was silent. No cry, no struggle, no indication she knew anything was wrong. In the next case, the disappearance is not silent. It is witnessed by multiple people who see it happen in real time, who see the moment of separation, who describe what comes next with a consistency that is either remarkable or deeply disturbing, depending on how willing you are to believe what witnesses report when they have no reason to lie. And the victim, before vanishing, drops his equipment, deliberately, as if he already knows he will not need it again.